All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our February 4th installment of the Forage Forum Fridays. So today I'm excited. We get to talk about kind of a couple of fun topics today. So kind of what are those things to kind of have in your forage toolkit? And then also kind of what maybe some of those gadgets that might be coming down the pipeline that some people may be talking about and looking at. So today I have with me Brooke Stefancik. She is the Ag and Natural Resource Educator. And are you split 4-H, Brooke? Yes. Yep. And you are in, let me get it right. I'm not going to get it right this morning.
Sullivan County.
Sullivan County, that's right. I should know that by now. So I'm excited to have Brooke with me today. Also with us today is Jason Tower. He's the superintendent down at the Southern Indiana Purdue Ag Center. And he's done some extensive grazing network and opportunities down there. So we're excited to have Jason with us as well this morning. So with that, I will hand it over to the both of you. Again, if you have questions at any point today, type them in the chat box, or at the end, feel free to unmute yourself to ask then. I will also, as normal, have a little poll at the end for us to answer, if you could please. And we look forward to hearing what you guys have to say. What are those tools we need in our toolkit?
Thanks, Alicia. Let me get my screen going here. So like Alicia said, I am the Agriculture and Natural Resources Extension Educator as well as 4-H for Sullivan County. And my background, I went to Purdue and got a degree in animal science, and then got my master's degree in the agronomy department because I really saw the value in the crossover, especially with grazing and hay and all that. You can't know a lot about animals and not know about the things that they eat. So that's really what inspired me to kind of take both sides of that in my education. So I'm going to start today kind of from the agronomist, the manager's perspective. What are the things to have either hanging on our wall in our office to use throughout the growing season or even the off season? Or what are those things that maybe your local Purdue Extension office has that you don't have to buy, so you could go and utilize that resource for free? So the first thing we want to make sure is that you have a good agronomist that knows forages. So to have someone on your team, whether that's sometimes your local extension educator is an agronomist. So for those, if you're in Sullivan County, come and see me and we can talk. Otherwise, they can get with, we have a state forage specialist. That's his picture there, Dr. Johnson. And he is a great resource for all of Extension and all of Indiana as well. And so make sure you have that person on your team that knows forages and can give you good recommendations for whatever forage related issues that you want to work through to work on your goals or whatever, planning for the next year, all that stuff. Great to talk with an agronomist and someone trained in forages just to help you get going. In your NRCS office, I also want to mention them. They have a lot of cost sharing programs for water systems, high traffic area pads for mud control, just a lot of different resources. Usually the extension educators and the NRCS are working together anyway, so we can really all work together to help you out with your goals. The next thing I want to tell you guys about is the web soil survey. So this allows you to go online, and it's basically moving the old soil books for each county, plat books, online. So you can go on here and find your farm. It'll tell you about your soil types, where your water table is. It can tell you about the drainage potential, if you have restricting layers. So for crops like alfalfa, you don't want that fragipan or that restricting layer very shallow in the soil because it can cause issues with root growth. So I use this when people come in and say they have issues with their pasture or whatever, just to get a basic overview. Where are they located and what are the soil types and maybe what are some advantages and disadvantages of that location. And I also used it myself when we were looking at purchasing houses to see, does my house have a basement? This can tell me if it's not a good idea to have a basement because of flooding. And so just a lot of great resources comes out of this one application. So the other thing I use the web soil survey for is to determine what soil types are in a field. So after I know what soil types are in the field, I can take my soil probe off my wall, or you can go to the extension office and get that soil test by soil type. So just a few reminders on the screen. You want to be consistent in your timing of sampling each year or each time you sample. So if you're going to sample in the fall, then each time you sample, you should sample in the fall if possible. Or when big changes occur. So when we purchased our house, it was in May. So I wanted to get a soil test before I even started this season. It was later than what I would have been ideal, but then I just took one last fall. And so from now on out, I'm going to be sampling in the fall. And then you can use those soil test results to decide what fertilizer and what lime you need. Again, going back to working with your agronomist on that and determining really the soil test is the first step. The soil probe should be the first tool that you should use when making management decisions. The next thing I have is called the weed control guide. So if you go online and type in Purdue WS16, I also have the link. I'll be giving some of these links of the things I'm talking about to Alicia to post in the bottom information on the recording so you can access those there. Most extension offices should have a copy as well, but you can go in there and see page by page what weeds you may be dealing with, and it gives all like the active ingredients of herbicides to choose from. And so you can figure out what is the best herbicide to spray for the weed pressure specifically that I'm having. But the other thing you might need to know is on the weed control is what kind of weeds. So go back with that agronomist to identify first what are the weeds. So in this pasture, there was a lot of Canada thistle. And so that is one that spreads with an underground rhizome. So if I had recommended for them to go in and till, every plant would have become 2 plants. So it's really important using that weed control guide and your agronomist to know what's in your field and the best way to eradicate those issues. And sometimes it's just working on your soil fertility with that soil test. The next tool in the toolkit is the forage field guide. So a lot of my clients that come to my office, they make fun of me because my forage field guide's a little beat up. It's looking a little rough, but I use it so often for a lot of things. And sometimes I use it for things not even related to forages. So I'll look at some of the soil test levels and stuff like that just to get a baseline for like even my garden and stuff to see, okay, what are the normal ranges, you know, low and high. And so this is just a really handy guide. I have one in my work bag. I have one in my car. I have one on my desk. I have one in my house. So I just have them everywhere. So wherever I am, I have access to all the information. So just really great from identifying plants, identifying insects, identifying weeds, control options for all of those things, grazing management, everything in there. So you can get those at the education store from Purdue. They're $9 each. And just a really great overall resource that has kind of everything you would need in a pocket guide. The next thing to have kind of on your wall is a sweep net. So to go out there and scout for insects, use the sweep net, but also, you know, use your hands and your eyes too to get down and look. Last year, if you're in Indiana, you probably heard about the alfalfa or the armyworm issue we were having last fall. And so that's not one, you know, you can use a sweep net to get an idea, but really looking at the ground level, separating those plants and looking down at the soil to see how many larvae are there, and getting an idea for maybe what control you might need to start thinking about. And again, Forage Field Guide and online Purdue entomology resources can help you figure out maybe some treatment options if you do have some insects that are potentially causing a large issue. So have that sweep net on your wall, go out and use it a couple times during the growing season or every few weeks if you think there could be pressures. Definitely get out there and look. So I had one guy that I was talking to, I think it was after one of our pesticide applicator trainings. because I had mentioned about alfalfa. And so you can see in this, in these pictures, this is the potato leafhopper, which is a big issue for alfalfa. And so he was telling me, I think we got to talking about soil tests, and he said, I always have issues with boron deficiency in my alfalfa. He said, I get the yellowing along the edges of the leaves. And I said, oh, does that occur after, or like right before the second cutting or after the first cutting? He was like, yeah, that's usually when it shows up. So then I told him, well, that's probably a potato leafhopper issue, not a boron issue. So hopefully he'll call me back this summer and we can take the sweep net out there and address and see maybe what the issue is. If we don't find anything in the sweep net, then we can take some tissue samples and send them off to the lab too for analysis. So the grazing stick, this is something that the Indiana Forage Council has sold before, but I believe we don't have any currently for sale, but you can just use the yardstick if you'd like. It's usually a 4-sided stick that has a bunch of different grazing equations in it. The good thing is all those grazing equations can be found in the Forage Field Guide from Purdue. And I also have a link to a resource with some of those equations for free. So I'll have Alicia post those as well, a publication on how to use a grazing stick. So the most important thing is just going out, like we said before, scouting in those fields, take that grazing stick and see how tall is my grass growing or my forages growing? Did I leave the cows or the animals out there too long to get less than 4 inches? And now I'm going to have to leave them out of that pasture a little bit longer to regrow. If you can go in there before you start moving animals, you can calculate how long should you leave those animals in that pasture based on how much ground cover and what kind of plants are out there. So just really handy to go out there, and it all comes back to scouting, getting out in the field with all these tools and using them, and just, you know, boots on the ground, eyes in the field. Really important to have these tools with you to check everything. So the importance of the grazing stick, not to get less than that 4 inches, because we're managing forage right now at a golf course. So we want to keep those plants tall and healthy. The next thing to have either on your wall or to go ask your extension agent for is a hay probe. So the one that this person is using is from a forage field day a few years back. It's a manual probe, so you just your manpower, that's all, and it doesn't take much strength, much power, and you just poke it through the side of the bale. So on the round bale, we do like a 45-degree angle, one on each side. Square bales, you go from like the butt end of the bale to go all the way through. And so you get that sample and send it in so that you know what is the nutritional value of the forage that I have on hand. This takes out the guesswork from formulating rations, and just really helps you rest easier at night knowing my animals are getting the nutrition they need. I know all my needs are met. I haven't guessed that, do I need to put a protein tub out or not? Do I need to supplement with grain or minerals? You know all of that from this hay test. These probes can be anywhere from $150 to $300. I have found some cheaper ones. If you're real handy, you might be able to make one yourself. But most of our extension educators in Indiana have these, or the county over will have it. I have one in my office in Sullivan County. And so I'm happy to come out and show people in my county how to use it. And I know a lot of the other educators are as well. And so this link, foragetesting.org, that I have on the slide, it does have a list of hay probes available. And it also has the list of forage testing labs that are approved labs. So they go through like tests to make sure that what their results from their testing in their lab matches the actual. So they go through kind of this validation process, a third-party validation, to make sure that they're giving the best test that they can. So the hay probe, another great thing to have on your wall. When I started sampling at my house, my hay, I'm pretty sure I have the guy down the road that bales for me. Pretty sure he probably thought I was crazy because I'm going out there after every wagon got loaded. I'm taking samples. But the first or second time I sent him the results from that sample, he said, oh, this is really interesting. So people may be a little hesitant at first, like, why do we need this? But then if you can get them to do it once or twice, they'll see the value of it moving on after that. The next thing is moisture and temperature hay bale probe. So just checking that that hay that we're baling, or maybe if you're buying hay straight out of the field, knowing what is the temperature, because we want to avoid fires and barn fires. So you want to keep testing that moisture and temperature for 3 to 4 weeks after baling, and know your danger zone. So you want to be at less than 20% moisture, and less than 18% is ideal for round bales. And so if that temperature is getting above 125 degrees Fahrenheit, you really want to be monitoring that temperature frequently so that you know if there's any issues arising. And I also have a link for these kind of moisture and temperature probes that I'll have Alicia post as well. And so you don't have to have a fancy probe to do this. You can do this with something as basic as a microwave. And so Purdue has instructions on how do you take a sample from the windrow of the hayfield and put it in the microwave and say, okay, what moisture am I at? Is it safe to bale yet? I also saw something today. It was using an air fryer to dry down that hay the same way that we would use a microwave. I haven't personally tried that yet, but I'm interested. It would just be like the fancier forced air dryers that you can buy for like labs and stuff. And so I'm interested, if anyone's tried that, let me know. But I think, you know, as new things come out like that, now don't use your microwave or your nice air fryer in your house. You would have to go and get a separate one. You know, maybe Goodwill has a microwave that still works or something like that. But just to dry down that sample and say, am I in a safe range for this hay before I put it up in the barn and potentially cause a fire. The next thing for anyone who is working with silage would be the Penn State particle separator. So you'll go out and take a test cutting with your forage harvester and run it through this separator to see what is my chop length currently. And so at that point, you can dial in the chop length on that machine. So don't do this after you've cut the whole field. You're going to take a sample first, go back and adjust the machinery so that you're making sure that what you're putting in the silo, whether it's a bag or a bunker or a tower, is the correct chop length so it will ferment better. And also when the cattle go to eat it after the ensiling process, it'll be the right length where they'll want to eat all of it instead of picking through and finding the best parts and not, you know, maybe leaving out the bigger chunks and stuff like that. And if you get it too fine, that can mess up with the rumen function. So the bacteria won't get that scratch factor that they necessarily need if that forage was chopped too finely. The other thing that we have at Purdue as a resource is the Plant and Pest Diagnostic Laboratory. So if you just Google Purdue PPDL, you can get all the information you need. Most of your extension offices will help you submit a sample as well. So it's $11 to submit a sample. They can test for disease. So if you're having some plants dying and you're not sure, again, that'd be a good time to contact your agronomist to help you take the sample if you need that assistance. And so looking at things like root rots and stuff, you can, you know, determine maybe is it fusarium or something else, or if there's leaf diseases, you can figure out exactly what could be going on there. So $11 per sample. Out of state, it is $22, but just a good resource. They can identify plants, just a bunch of different things that they can do and identify for you. And I also want to talk just a minute while we're on this slide. We also have the Purdue Animal Disease and Diagnostic Laboratory, and there's actually one of those hosted at the Southern Indiana Purdue Ag Center as well as on Purdue campus. So we have the two locations there to serve Indiana, and they can help with things like necropsies and other stuff like that from the animal side of things. So both the plant and animal side diagnostic laboratories can help you in figuring out any issues that you may be having. And the last thing I want to talk about before I hand it over to Jason is just record keeping. So it's really important just to track the who, what, when, where, why, and how of all production decisions that you're making. So whether you use a basic calendar, I also found recently these waterproof notebooks, field notebooks. So if you're someone who likes to write stuff down and you're stuffing papers in the tractor, maybe you invest in a nice waterproof notebook and pencil, tie the pencil on there so you don't lose it, and keep a track. It doesn't have to be fancy, but keeping track, did you scout for insects or disease? What maturity were plants at that day? When did you move cows out of a pasture? When did you spray a pesticide? When did you apply fertilizer and lime? How much did you apply? Did you reseed? How much rain did you get? Was it freezing? All those things will just help you dial in. I think it was last year we had that later freeze in May here in southern Indiana. And so a week or two later, I was walking through the field with my niece, and we saw a bunch of leaves that had turned brown and kind of died. She's like, "What's happening?" And I said, "Oh, you know what?" I said, "I bet that freeze a couple weeks ago killed those leaves." And so you could see kind of where that freeze line, where that plant was the previous 2 weeks. If we hadn't have known that, then we may not have been able to identify that as the issue. The other things I wanted to mention on here, if you are more wanting a more tech way to store some of those things, Google Sheets is a good option where you don't have to buy a Microsoft package. I'm sure there's other like Excel online software too. The good thing about the Google Sheets, you can put that application on your phone as well. So you can do your record keeping from the field, and it will populate automatically when you open it on your computer, maybe back in the office as well. So that's a good way. And you can add multiple people to that. So if you have a crew on the farm and you're trying to keep track of what everyone's doing, if everyone had the Google Sheets app on their phone and you had it back in the office, they can track what each field is doing or looks like and any issues, and you can all work on the same document. So you're not trying to like save a file here and save a file there. Each extension office usually has a Purdue farm record book. So that's just a printed book with places to keep receipts and tallies of everything like that, field work. And then I also have a link to a free online record book service, and particularly there's 2 pages in there, page 43 and 44, that track livestock and forage, how the pastures are looking that day, if you did any spraying or fertilizing. So 2 really great tables that I found that I liked a lot, and so we'll share that link with you also. And the last thing I'm going to talk about or mention to you is Pasture Map. So this is a service that you can buy that helps you track kind of all those things that I've already talked about. And I'm going to let Jason talk a little bit more about that, because that is something that he has used, but it seems to be a really cool upcoming technology that you can pay for to help keep track of things at the farm. So if anyone has any questions now for me, I'll take those. And if not, I will pass it on to Jason to continue our talk on more of the high-tech, futuristic options of forages.
Thank you, Brooke. I do not see any questions at the moment, but we can take a couple of minutes and see if anybody has any questions on what you have discussed for today. All right, we're not seeing anything just yet. So we'll go ahead and let Jason continue on with his presentation.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Brooke, for getting us started in this, and we'll just jump right in kind of where you left off. You know, with pasture related stuff, sometimes it's hard to know where we're at, you know, what we've done over the years, what do we know if we're gaining from anything, and keeping those records, as Brooke mentioned, is important in doing that. And whether it's pen and paper, an Excel spreadsheet, which I do, or the couple I was going to mention are some cloud-based internet services that allow more detailed records on your farm and can keep a historical record of what's going on and what you've done over time. The two I'm aware of are Pasture Map, and the other one is MyGraze. Both of them are very similar, offer similar services. It is a subscription that you pay for each year, and it varies based on the size of your operation and animal numbers and things like that. But it does do some nice things, and we'll look at some pictures on as far as looking at data and how that comes. This happens to be what I use is the Pasture Map program. That happened to be the first one I came across and used, so I can't speak a whole lot of the other one, but from what I've looked at online, they're very similar. But it gives you some nice charts that you can look at. And, you know, we talked about rest and recovery time. Brooke did a little bit. So this breaks out different fields that are on your operation. The different colors actually are different groups of livestock. And then you can see within each pasture system the days of rest in between your grazing events, and you can kind of keep an eye on things that way. And then it's also based on your map. So this is the farm, and then it has several different layers that you can put on there. These numbers that are represented on these different fields is actually animal unit days per acre. So we can get an idea of what kind of production we've gotten over the grazing season. And then the colored little dots there are where livestock happen to be on this particular day when we did that. You can also put infrastructure stuff in there, water tanks, change that to days of rest and different layers, but it's a quick way to do that. And then the app is also on your phone. So when you move a group of livestock from one field to the other, you can do it right there as you do it to the next field, and it'll make all those calculations and come up with that information for you. So it's a nice handy way to see what's going on at the end of the year for you to review information. You know, did you make a change in your grazing management? You can compare that to what previous years does. Was there an extreme weather event? You can start making some sense of what that data is. So similar to a yield monitoring a combine, but a lot more fun. One of the things that we need to know or like to know is an estimation on forage availability. Brooke showed the grazing stick that's out there. You can kind of look at that and see height, but just because your tallest blade of grass or forage is 15 or 18 inches tall, that doesn't necessarily mean everything is, and that you can't use that. So you got to make a visual estimation of that. What is available or rising or falling, depending on who you talk to. Plate meter, and they can be as basic or as fancy as you want to be. The lower left-hand corner here is a manually one. The plexiglass plate is a particular size. The holes are drilled out to get the weight correct. And then depending on the density of your stand and the sward it is, there's some calibration charts. You get a height, and then you get so many acres of so many pounds of dry matter per inch of height out there, so you can estimate how much is available. And then if you want to do follow-up when you leave, did you leave enough residual there? There's also digital ones available, some completely automatic, like the top left. You walk along, set that down, it measures those heights and does a calculation for you when you get that field done. This is more of a manually one where you keep track of how many stops that you've made, and it calculates what the height is and do a little math when you're done. But all of those will get you a answer to dry matter out there, so you can track how fast things are growing, what you harvested, and use that again for your records to know what kind of gains we're making. So for the rest of the talk here this afternoon, we're going to talk about some of the things that we use, almost on a daily basis here at SciPac. Some stuff that's, maybe nothing new, but maybe not everybody's seen it before, but it makes a difference in what we're able to do. A lot of the things you'll see and things I think about, flexibility is a key. We're grazing different species of livestock here at SciPac. You're doing it at different seasons of the year, have an effect. You'll have different stock densities, group size of those animals. So being able to use a lot of these things in all those situations is pretty important. So we'll hit some water things, we'll hit some fence things. We'll talk a little bit more about some higher tech pasture monitoring things that are out there and coming, and a little bit of high tech fence at the very end that's coming down the pipe. We're going to start with water. Oftentimes that's one of our biggest challenges in a managed grazing system, having it enough locations and how we get it there and easily being able to move it. When we first started doing this stuff 20 some years ago when I got here, we had some portable tanks, but to go to move it, we had to unhook the hose and then physically dump it out and then try to drag it or set it on the ATV to carry it. And it was a lot of aggravation and didn't work. So one of the guys kind of came up with making these sleds out of treated lumber that have a chain on it. And then we just keep a ball on the ATV. The smaller tanks, like this is a 100-gallon tank, or the 30 or 40-gallon tanks we use on the smaller ruminants, don't even need to drain the water. Unhook your hose, throw the chain over the ball, move to the next location. Can be done pretty quickly and easily. We do these from, as I mentioned, small tanks for sheep and goats up to 300-gallon tanks that we use on larger groups of cattle. Those big tanks we do drain, but it's an easy way to move all that stuff along and be flexible on where that location's at and moving that water with the livestock as you're grazing. To make those connections, we're almost exclusively these quick connectors. So there'd be a female side that's in your supply line, and then this male side would be on your garden hose or whatever you're using to get from your water source to your tank. It's just a one snap in. It completely opens up, your water flows through. You grab the lever up here on the top left corner there, and that unhooks it, automatically shuts off, close the cap, and you're good to go. The bottom right shows you that hooked up. This happens to be some water line that lays on top of the ground that most of our grazing seasons, while things are growing, we're able to get away with that. This time of year, obviously, if you don't drain it, you're freezing, you're going to have some challenges there. Where we bury that, we use those same fittings, but we'll use a 10 or 12-inch tile down into the ground. And top left picture there, you look down inside that, there is that female quick coupler with the lid opened up. And then to seal that, mostly to keep critters and dirt and debris out of, we've just made treated lids that pop down in there. And then that bottom left corner, you can see that's all closed up. We generally do that right under a fence line so you can have access from either side, and then that keeps the livestock from stepping on it. This time of year, if you're still grazing, which we're fortunate enough, we still got some livestock out grazing. Although we did pack them a little bit of hay today. We got ice here the last 2 days, so grazing is limited. But keeping water from freezing in the wintertime is a challenge in this time. So we've rigged up several of our tanks to allow water overflow. We're fortunate in our nice rolling hills to utilize a lot of pond water from a gravity system, or even some pumped, and we can afford to waste that water. But we put a T in the system. This is our automatic shutoff valve here that I'm highlighting. Then the T comes up. We can regulate flow rate depending on how cold it is, and then it's capped off on the top. And then that cap has 2 or 3 holes drilled in it, small holes depending on the size of your tank, to direct water to the surface, a little more pressure to keep that water stirring. And moving water does not freeze, so depending on how cold it is, you adjust your flow rate accordingly, and so you're limiting water. And then the other fitting that's here in the top is our overflow. So we're taking that overflow water away from where the livestock would be drinking, so we're not making a mud hole. This is just a couple shots of those similar things. The upper right hand is just the top of that cap, and then you can see the holes drilled in there. And this bottom left one, that's the overflow. And we put this extension pipe about 6 inches down, just with the cattle particular. They're not necessarily cleanly, and they always want to bring a little grass and forage that they're grazing. And with that overflow, sometimes that would plug up. So we put that in there, that prevents that. And then the hole in the top here prevents that turning into a siphon to where you would be running water out below that. Then on the back side of the tank, where that overflow is, this green hose is our overflow. So that's taking that water out away from where the animals are at. I will say I've learned over time, if you're going to go that far, you really need a larger discharge hose. That water's not moving fast enough and it'll freeze up and back up on you. And then the red hose is our incoming line. And as long as that water's all moving, everything works fine. And this is just a shot down at that tank that day. You can see the outer edges of that's froze. And right there where that's at is nice, and the animals are able to get to that to drink. We have over time been trying to install a permanent water location in our fields, and we've moved to these industrial tire tanks to do that. That gives us a lot more volume. We can make a good all-weather pad around it. These particular tires come to us, so we purchase those. This sidewall is already cut out. We fill in the lower side with some concrete, run our plumbing through. Again, we have our float valve, so when the animals drink, you have your full fill rate, so you're not shorting animals water to where they're fighting. And then we have a valve here. We can adjust the incoming water to keep the surface from freezing. And then this 2-inch PVC on this is our overflow, and we've buried that line down over the hill to a spot to let that overflow turn out. And this is just it in use. Again, the outer edges here froze up. This valve's shooting the water this way, so kind of underneath the fence here is nice and free. And that was a 0-degree morning for us down here, and still had good access to water. Something that was brought to my attention a few years ago. This is my colleague out in Missouri. He runs on some rented ground a little bit away from home and doesn't necessarily get to see the livestock every day, but does do the temporary fences and moves on a regular basis and moves water tanks. But in the summertime, if they've dumped a water tank or you've had an issue, can be detrimental to the cattle, and keeping track of that when it's distance away as you're traveling is hard. So he has purchased game cameras that have a cellular signal to them, and bought the service, and sets that up to where it is taking a picture of the animals and of the tank. That's the 2 pictures you can see there. So you can see the animals up drinking, you can see the water level in the tank's good, and he has done that. And $15 a month is what that cost him for those photos and peace of mind to know what's going on. So I thought that was a pretty ingenious idea to use some technology kind of designed for something else, but to have a positive impact for us livestock. And this is just, again, to show his setup. This heavier post here has got the camera on it shooting down here to his tank, and then he can get those photos and know that he's got water for the cattle. I will move into some fencing things here. A managed grazing system, an electric fence is the heart of that, and give us the flexibility to do what we like. So a good energizer is of utmost importance to that. There's lots of good brands out there. This happens to be one that we have. And a lot of the systems anymore, depending on the size you get, have a remote shutoff, which is really nice. So if you've got one energizer power and several hundred acres of pasture, the shorten your fence is never close to the energizer. And it's nice to be able, at the time you see the problem, to quickly shut that off. So that's what this remote allows you to do, is shut your fence off right there at the spot, fix the fence, turn it back on, and go about life. This particular remote is also a fault finder. So you see the numbers showing there. It'll give you the voltage that's on your fence, and also how big of a short it is, and it can give you some direction to which way to go to find that short. The fault finders are available just with the numbers on that to show you direction. So those are tools that we keep in all of the ATVs and trucks here. So there's no excuse for anybody to say, well, I didn't know the fence wasn't hot, or if it was on and they get bit, you could have tested that out. But This happens to be a plug-in unit running off 110, but there's a lot of good units available utilizing solar as well. And most of the major manufacturers, their Energizer units themselves are designed to either run off a 110 plug into the wall or off 12-volt system with the same unit. It comes with both plug-in systems. So if you've got a good solar panel, some marine batteries, you can run with good 6, 8, 10 joule output Energizers and cover several hundred acres, as opposed to some of the small self-contained units that have a little solar panel on it, a little battery, really don't have enough output to keep fence very hot, particularly if you've got much of a weed load on it. So that stuff is out there, and things that we do use if we're grazing some areas we don't have access to 110 on. When we are out in season grazing with the cattle, most of our fields are 20, 25 acres permanently fenced perimeter. And then within that perimeter fence, we'll subdivide 2, 4, 6, 10, 12, 20 times, depending on the time of year, the class of livestock that we're grazing, goals at the time, stock densities that we want. So to do that, we need to be flexible in what we're doing. So this photo is showing several things, a couple different reels there with our wire on there. The reels can be a standard gear reel 1-to-1. So every rotation you make with the handles, just one rotation on the spool, or 3-to-1 geared reel, which is a little quicker. But sometimes you need to hang those reels out in the middle on a polywire fence, and you don't have a good place to do it. So this is something we've came up with. This is a pitchfork. Happened to be a 5-prong when we bought it, but we cut one off because it got too hard to put in the ground. And then we just made a bracket that we put on there, and then we're able to hang those reels on, make a corner post. We've got if you're using this and you're strip grazing, you can use that on both ends for either your handle. But it just gives you a lot of flexibility where you're putting those reels, where you're putting your subdivisions in, and you can control the livestock and the densities you want, whether you're moving daily, every other day, multiple times a day. Offers that flexibility. Within that, poly wire, poly braid, that's what we use mostly on that reel. There's also poly tape. If you're just getting started with electric on your animals and they're not used to it, the tape's a little wider and easier to see. The poly braid is what we've gone to mostly. It seems to be a little bit more durable and lasts a little bit longer and still carry the charge really well. For the cattle, a couple post options. The bottom left is a pigtail post, a single wire option. The top is insulated, and you slip your wire in there and carry on. The poly post here has multiple heights that you can put that wire if you need to run 2 wires. If you're running sheep and you want to run a couple poly wires to hold them, that works well. I don't have much luck with our goats keeping them behind 1 or 2 poly wires. We just can't keep our fence hot enough to keep them satisfied. So it's just kind of preference on what you like and what class of livestock that you're running. The other thing you'll notice in this photo is this jumper lead next to the reel with the red ends on it. So that's a alligator clips, and that's a way to get the power from your perimeter fence, permanent fence, over to your temporary fence. And then we'll see some handles here in a slide or so for the other end. Here we go. These handles, this bottom left, this yellow handle is a dead end. So it's just a plastic handle. Your wire's tied there, so you can hook that on a single hot wire and you're not energizing anything until you're done working on it. Last few years, they've come out with another one that has options. So you can hook your wire in this inner slot, and that's dead. It isn't going to be hot, or you can hook it out here on this wire, and then that will make your poly wire fence hot if you need to get it hot from one end or the other. The other thing that would be, there's a lot of things we could do without on the farm here at SciPac, but one of them I wouldn't be without is our side-by-side or four-wheeler, either one. When we're moving cattle, there's a group of cattle or a group of livestock getting moved every day. We're able to take everything along with us. The step-in post, you can see our pitchfork corners there, our reels, our jumper leads. And then in the box right there behind the cab is our step-in post. We can take our mineral along with us. We've got our chain to drag our water tanks, and we're able to do everything in one unit and keep things going. So that's a very, very handy tool for us. When it comes to our smaller ruminants, our sheep and goats, our temporary fencing of choice there is this electrified netting. And it works both to keep the animals contained, and quite honestly, it is also our predator protection. Now you can see the challenge as we get later into the grazing season. If we've not made our first pass, that vegetation does get growing pretty well, and it can cause some shorts in the fence as you get that much growth on there. So we will come through and mow a path that you can see in this lower left corner to prevent that, so we can keep plenty of juice on the fence. And with the goats in particular, if there seems to be less than 3,000, 2,000 volts on it, they just don't feel that, then they're going to start rubbing on it and getting their horns tangled up in it and get quite the mess. So we will start mowing paths late in the growing season. First pass to you keep from doing that. And it's just a setup. You can see we're doing everything at one time. This is just a little compact utility tractor. I've got a little big brush hog on the back to mow our path with. With the chain, I can grab a supplement feeder. You can see our mineral feeder here on a tire. Our water tank's up in the bucket. So with one pass, I can do a lot of things and have the netting to do that. So it doesn't have to be all big equipment. Depending on what you're doing, you can make things a lot of work with smaller stuff. It's not necessarily an in-season grazing thing, but it's something we've started using that I really like is when ground conditions are right for us and we've still got some grazing going, want to stretch some things, having the ability to unroll some hay with some light equipment, not do field damage, is pretty nice. So this is just a bale unroller that you can pull with side by side or UTV. You can spread that hay out so everybody has access, but prevent animal damage around those areas, and then spreading that out in several locations. Not also spread out the nutrients left over from the hay that they don't graze, but nutrients that they're taking in and passing through, and the manure and urine gets spread out more over the field better too. So that's a nice little handy tool that we like to use to supplement grazing when the times are appropriate. One of the last tools we've made with, it's important that animals, have the right mineral nutrition as well, and moving mineral feeder around was always a challenge. It was similar to the water tank. When I started, we'd try to pick this thing up and bounce it on the rack or something like that. We first started out just building wood frames with a chain on there all the time. That worked fine. Wood frames wore out, chain would get stuck down in the dirt and the mud, having to dig it out. We've since moved to mounting these mineral feeders on used junk semi tires that we get free from our local tire shop. We put a eye bolt through that, bolted in, and then keep a short chain with a hook on it, and we can hook that in and drag that around the mineral with the ATV or side by side, either one. So that makes that system quick, makes moving animals easy without a whole lot of effort. We'll move on here to some of the newer technology, higher technology stuff. A lot of people are familiar with UAVs, drones, depending on how you're talking to, and most often, we're seeing aerial photos coming off of these, which is nice. It gives us a different view of our pastures. We can maybe see some weed stuff showing up, maybe some overuse areas, some bare areas like you see here. Maybe where some water is accumulating, we might want to do something with. We can potentially use it to pick out some livestock or where we're at. But kind of some of the neat things that you can add to those are different sensors. And with those sensors, get an idea of plant health. This is a series of photos over 10, 15 days. And the darker green, the healthier plants are. So you can see, as that pasture has gotten better, things have improved. You can look at, pre and post grazing situations and really see if you're overgrazing, you're going to see a lot of these oranges and yellows show up. And as that health turns back, you're going to see more of the green things. Another sensor that I became aware of this summer that was out there that I didn't know was this thermal sensor. This was in June here last summer in SciPac, Southwest Indiana. And all the red spots you see are the cattle that we just made a move, and they're out grazing. This upper left-hand corner happens to be where the water tank is. But what I was hoping to, over time, is there a difference in red-hided or black-hided cattle? You can also see some difference in pasture. We know that if we graze too short, we open that pasture up to a lot of heat and from the sun, and as that heat gets on there, it dries out. So you'll see this area in the upper right, that's actually the yard to my house where we had mowed. So that grass is quite a bit shorter than what the pasture is. So that's some technologies that's coming that we may have some opportunities to learn some things with, and how we use that information and make judgment calls on our operations. And kind of finish up here with the last couple things that are further down the pike that are just probably in trial areas. Been doing it down in Australia, New Zealand for quite some time, just kind of making its way out in the US. Jorgensen Land and Cattle is a big operation out in the Dakotas, I believe. But this is virtual fencing. They call it Vents collar. And it's kind of like the invisible fence that you see for your dog, except each animal has a collar that they wear, and you set their boundaries via computer on where you want them. And then as animals approach those boundaries, they're warned with the audio noise, and as they get closer, they do get a little electric zap like they would with electric fence. What I thought was neat, what Jorgensen was doing, they also have a lot of hunting and areas, so they're able to plant food plots for hunting, but still graze that range land and fence those food plots out so animals do not hit that area. As mentioned here, there's a lot of crop residue, cover crops that goes unutilized that adding livestock back on the land could add a lot of benefit to. That maybe over time, as this technology is proven, give us a lot of flexibility with where we can graze livestock and not have to build a lot of infrastructure and keep everybody safe. Last couple of things here are just some GPS tracking technology. You get out in bigger country, knowing where those animals are to find them, or if you've got a cow that you calved off in the brush and you can't find it, these GPS tags can follow that. You can monitor activity. After storms in the south with hurricanes and things, it might be a way to keep track of where those animals are at. There's a fee with a lot of these things, and how you utilize that. But even tracking activity as to animal health, if they get to where they're off by themselves or they're not typical movement, or some of the things that they've looked at on that sort of thing. So with that, I've run through a bunch of photos and pictures. Be glad to visit and answer questions as time allows.
All right, thank you, Jason. So we did have one question in the chat box. So actually a couple here. So how do you convince producers to go out and scout despite having remote sensing options? So like with the game camera and things like that, how do you convince people to still put their feet on the ground?
My preference would be feet on the ground from the get-go. I think those other ones are nice and are a minor tool, but there's so much things that you cannot see from those areas that's my concern, that you rely on those too much, you lose stockmanship and animal husbandry skills. So like I said, I think they're a nice tool to use, but they sure are not my first go-to.
Mm-hmm. All right. And then did you have something to add, Brooke?
Yeah, I was going to say, sometimes those, if they're using those, that's a first step sometimes maybe. So you're going to use the drone or something like that, and you want to see, oh, someone's looking rough over there. You have to, like, you can't see specifics, so you have to go in with the sweep net or just your eyes and your hands at first to see. So sometimes those things can help us dial in a specific area if we have a lot of acreage, but it's never going to replace your own eyes seeing it at a foot distance or however, close you need to get to see what's going on. I'm not like armyworm, for example. If I had stood in my house, I can see, most of my hayfield right now over the top of my computer screen. If I made all my management decisions from my desk here, I would have never known that the armyworm were out there in that field until the field was gone. So maybe they'll have to learn once. I don't know. You know what I mean? But so.
All right. And then about the vents, how fine scale is that boundary when you set it?
I honestly don't know how small areas that you can do. What I've read on it has been, large scale plots, 15, 20 acre areas that they're fencing out, and, they're grazing bigger areas among that. So I cannot answer that question.
Okay. Do you know on like the fence line, how accurate it would be? So like if you set it here, would it, like the remote sensing, would it get it within that exact spot, or would it be within like 5 feet or so of that set boundary? Or
I would say it would be within a set boundary. So if you were doing it the grazer roadside, you wouldn't want it right on the roadside, knowing that. and you need somewhat of a buffer zone because animals can get through that. And then it does kind of recalculate itself to allow that animal to drive it back in without getting shocked again, from my understanding. But yeah, there definitely need to be a zone of management around that. And I think you can also set how sensitive the collars are on the animals, how soon before that border they start getting notified that they're getting close. So I think there's some things you can build in that way as well, from my understanding. But like I said, I'm not by any means a very knowledgeable person on it.
Okay. I just saw looking online, they created a zone that was 30 yards wide, and in the first 20 yards, the cattle will get a beep from the collar, and then so you can control like that setting. This is saying within 30 yards at least. So
good. All right, any other questions? So I have launched our poll, so if you would please answer those questions, we'd appreciate it. And then also I've just posted on here, our Indiana Forage Council annual meeting is coming up in 20 days from today, actually. So we invite you to attend if you're here local in Indiana. Plenty of details here on this flyer and also at the Indiana Forage Council website. So,
Alicia?
Yes, Keith.
Yeah, I think we have some agriculture teachers that have been viewing this series, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, I think there's some things particularly that Brooke talked about that if you had the tools, it'd be really interesting in school laboratory types of setting, like moisture testing, or utilizing the probe to test the hay bales or the particle separator or so forth. But I think there's a lot of things to get some hands-on for these young people that those that are ag teachers that are viewing this might want to think about to get some hands-on activities.
Yep. Yeah, that's great. Great suggestion there, Keith. There's a lot of great resources like that would be easy enough to do in class in a building that would be great for future references, for future use. So, all right. Any further questions or comments? All right. Well, I thank you, Jason and Brooke, for being with us today. We greatly appreciate a peek into your toolkits for what you use or suggest for forages. So next week we have scheduled kind of farming with a four-wheeler. So what are kind of some of those tools and things like that they can use for maybe smaller acreages? So that should be a really fun presentation as well. So if there's nothing further, again, we greatly appreciate you being with us today. And we hope you have a great weekend. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks much.
Well done, Brooke and Jason.
Mhm.